how much muscle can you gain in 1 year if you do everything perfectly?
For the next year, I'm gonna train as perfectly as humanly possible.
Earlier this week, Jeff Nippard published a video breaking down his 1-year body transformation, during which he trained and ate as optimally as possible. Now, the results were pretty darn interesting, and I'll get back to them in just a second, but if you haven't seen the full video, I recommend checking it out. It's just over 30 minutes long, but I'll make sure to summarize all the key points right here so you can stick around without needing to watch his video first. So just over 1 year ago, Jeffrey Nipples, our favorite cutie patootie fitness YouTuber, and the less chaotic version of Mike Israetel,
I'm addicted to adult films,
wanted to see how much muscle he could gain in just a single year while optimizing all of his training, exercise selection, volume, intensity, and tracking his food religiously. Now, because Jeff is a pretty advanced athlete, the man is quite literally a professional natural bodybuilder, his gains are starting to become less and less noticeable every year as expected. And he says that he hasn't really seen any noticeable progress in the last few years, which is very normal, as the longer you train, the less muscle you're able to put on every year. And the Kiwi enthusiast was tired, so he set out on the process to see how much muscle he could gain by just locking in 100% for a full year. But Jeff didn't just want to see how much muscle he could gain, but he also brought in his own brother called Brad, who doesn't lift at all, to see the difference between an advanced level lifter like himself and a complete beginner with the same genetic makeup. Now, the training and diet wasn't properly individualized, and I'll get back to that later on, but the two ate the same amount of calories and trained the exact same way throughout the entire process. Using an upper-lower push-pull leg split, they trained 5 days per week and started the plan with a 6-month bulking phase, followed by a 3-month maintenance phase, and finished it all off with a 3-month cut to showcase all the progress properly at the end, with the goal being to end up at around the same body weight. Now, before the project, they took some baseline measures, height, weight, body fat percentage, and lean mass via the DEXA scan, and they used ultrasound for muscle thickness. Jeff measured in at just under 16% body fat, and Brad was just over 36%, which were both a bit higher than expected. Now, for the first 3 to 4 weeks of the project, they did what we call volume accumulation, a training strategy where you don't necessarily increase the reps or effort, but rather the total working sets to build work capacity and to ease into things, which in my opinion was necessary, especially for Brad, who was a complete beginner, and you don't really want him to start off in a wheelchair after the first week. But after 1 full month and 20 training sessions, they both did their first checkup test, and according to the DEXA, Jeff's brother had already gained 12.7 pounds of lean mass, which is around 5.7 kilos, and that is a tremendous gain in its own right.
How much lean did I gain?
1,400 grams of lean mass.
While Jeff gained around 3 pounds or 1.4 kilos of lean mass, which is pretty insane for an advanced level athlete. However, in Jeff's case, those changes might only come from measurement standard errors, because he also gained 1% body fat and his ultrasound results were pretty darn similar. Of course, you can't expect somebody to gain a lot of muscle in just 1 month regardless. However, something interesting to note is that lean mass is not necessarily the same as muscle mass, as in a DEXA scan that also includes bone mass, water, and organs, with water being a big confounding variable that is not easily controlled for, because you can accumulate fluids after training, and therefore a lot of the gains his brother made were definitely from higher water retention, and that might have also been the case for Jeff. But regardless, they went through the full 5 months with the goal of bulking, and not surprisingly, his brother was getting strong very fast, almost catching up to Jeff on certain exercises faster than Eddie Hall catching up to a speeding car. Jeff said that he felt he was getting a lot bigger as well, but also noticeably fatter, which is pretty normal in a calorie surplus, because you always tend to look bigger when you're lean, while you are actually bigger when you're fluffy and blow maxing.
I'm actually not feeling too well today, and so this is going to be the first day that I skip a workout.
Throughout the bulk, Jeff also managed to get sick once, he went on some sort of vacation, and stuff like this can be difficult to work around, because now you have to find new gyms, new equipment, you have to regulate your loads again, that sort of stuff. Though it didn't seem to affect Jeff in any noticeable way, nor would it really make any practical difference other than that it takes a while to get used to new routines. But what really surprised me during the first 6 months was his brother, because even though he started out as a complete beginner, Brad was sticking to the plans every week, never missing a single session, and apparently he also went to train in the middle of the night when he had to. Now that's some David Goggins level shit. Speaking as a coach, this is very unexpected from somebody who just started training recently, and Brad really put in the effort here. So after 6 months of bulking with no breaks, both guys did their end of bulk updates, and we saw that Brad only gained 0.3 pounds of lean mass, and his body fat percentage stayed roughly the same between the first checkup and 5 months later. So does that mean he didn't gain any muscle in 5 months? Well, no, because it goes back to what I said initially about the measurements not being accurate because of high fluid gains, probably from the creatine and inflammatory responses from training for the first time. In cases like these, where the measurements have errors of their own, it's important to look at the big picture to see what really happened. Not only did Brad get a lot stronger across the board, but he also looks a lot better, which to me is an indicator that he did gain muscle even though the testing didn't show it. Also, his bicep and quad ultrasound results improved, which again shows that you cannot solely rely on one metric when assessing muscle growth. Jeff, on the other hand, was up a massive 4.5 pounds of lean mass since the beginning, which is close to 2.2 kilos for non-cheeseburger people, but he also gained 11 pounds of fat. Now, I've talked about this before, that it's likely unnecessary for very advanced lifters to be in a big calorie surplus, because they will gain a disproportionate amount of body fat in relation to muscle. Mostly because muscle growth is a super slow process, while fat can accumulate very fast. Perhaps in Jeff's case, being in a slightly smaller surplus would have allowed him to build the same amount of muscle, but with less fat. But of course, that is just speculation, and it's very practically difficult to assess that. On the ultrasound though, his arms stayed pretty much the same, but he did gain a fair amount of size to his quads, which could indicate either higher genetic potential for leg growth, but it might also mean that his training was better suited for the low limbs after all. Now, during their maintenance phase, they did change up the training plan to a 3-week full body approach while they were on vacation in Japan, which is still a very good split for a lot of different training strategies, but it may also cause less high quality training in a practical sense, because with fewer sessions per week and the same volume, yes, the efficiency per session will be higher, but each singular muscle might not get as good of a stimulus than if you split up the training more. For example, if you do flat bench, squats, RDLs, and then do some pull downs, the performance on those pull downs might suffer compared to if you were doing them after just bench or just squats. Now, I don't think this made any noticeable difference at all, but it's just something to note about the changes they made halfway through the project. The guys also got a bit more flexible with their dieting on vacation, but that's life. I wouldn't expect the greatest athlete on earth, let alone Jeff Nippard, who has a billion other things to do, to strictly follow a plan 100% for a full year. That is simply not realistic. But after 3 weeks on vacation, they went back to the regular plan. However, during the testing after this 3-month maintenance phase, so they're 9 months in at this point, Mr. Kiwi Man actually lost lean mass according to the DEXA, which again isn't something I would worry about because of all the potential errors, but based on how he looks, Jeff looked noticeably leaner, especially downstairs, but the ultrasound again showed that if anything, he even gained a little bit of muscle, and the body fat change could also just be due to chance, as again, the DEXA is not 100% accurate at all.
DEXA scan is 100% accurate.
Status: arrested.
The same actually goes for his brother, who also lost a bit of lean mass according to the DEXA. But where Jeff hit really big was during the isometric strength testing, hitting a massive new personal record indicating actual muscle gains.
Oh, hold on. No, hold on. I felt something really weird in my knee.
But unfortunately, he also injured his knee in the process, which ultimately forced him to change his training to slower repetitions with lighter loads to still hit the intended reps and effort. Now, injuries from lifting themselves are very rare, but an isometric maximal knee extension test isn't something a lot of us ever practice for. And apparently, Jeff also skipped his warm-ups, which is against protocol.
I think it was just being fasted, not having anything to eat, and then because of like time constraints and everything, didn't do any warm-up before that test. So like, regardless, it is what it is. It happens.
I actually worked with that same machine during my own masters, and I can tell you that it's usually a very low-risk strength test if you follow the right protocols. But stuff like this can happen on occasion. So with an injured knee, the guys started their 3-month cut, where both set out to eat 2,200 calories, which definitely put them in a decent calorie deficit, and they increased their protein intake. And this is because 1, protein is generally the most filling macronutrient, and 2, that can make it theoretically easier to maintain muscle in a deficit. Now, Jeff also trained slightly lighter because the risk of injury on a cut could be marginally higher, though he still trained sufficiently hard by all means, leaving around 1 rep in reserve. But by the end of the project, the 2 guys weren't at their intended weights yet, so they expanded the cutting phase for 2 more months before finally revealing the end result. So in 1 full year, and technically 2 months, with a knee injury and trying to optimize training as much as possible, how much muscle did Jeff gain? Well, he gained 2.7 pounds of lean mass while staying at the exact same weight, which means he ended up being a bit leaner than he started, and I think that we can see a visual difference, because 2.7 pounds isn't little by any means for a guy who only weighs around 165 and has been training at a high level for well over 15 years. His brother Brad, though, was up around 10 pounds of lean mass and down 10 pounds of fat mass, so he also came in at the exact same weight as they started, and he managed to get a lot stronger, and he also improved his general heart health, which I think is a massive win. Could he have made slightly better gains? I would argue yes. I think that if the training and diet were both tailored to him specifically, that he would have made slightly better progress, but it's not like that's gonna matter a lot in the grand scheme of things. I do think that the biggest difference though was his mental transformation, as he said that he felt a lot more confident, he had no more social anxiety, and he was physically healthier across the board, which I personally think is the biggest reason for the general population to lift weights, because you either end up feeling a lot better or like this. Overall, I want to congratulate Jeff, because I don't think we've ever had anyone in the fitness scene dedicate themselves to this degree just for a video. Taking over 1 year to make, with scientific follow-up and measurements throughout, it's basically a double case study on an advanced athlete and a beginner with the same genetic foundation, which is incredibly rare to see across all sports science. Now, there are some errors with this whole thing, again going back to relying on the DEXA, which is still more accurate than most other body measurement tools for assessing composition outside of an MRI, but at the end we can see a visual difference. Jeff and his brother both got a lot stronger, presumably across the board, and the ultrasound measurements also showed an increase in muscle, though Jeff's quads didn't really grow noticeably because of his injury and probably his ability to train hard at the end. The actual amount of muscle gained is up for debate, but he definitely got something out of that full year. However, this all comes back to one question. Was dedicating the full year to building muscle worth it? From a scientific standpoint, I would argue yes, absolutely, and Jeff probably thinks it had a lot of other benefits, like spending quality time with his brother and getting him into good shape. But from a bodybuilding or sports perspective, is it worth going all in for a full year to see close to no results? I think that most people would say no. Most gym goers would probably say no too. But in Jeff's case, he is an athlete who has strived for perfection with his training for many years now, and I think that adding a few steaks of muscle was actually worth it to him, because training consistently like this will matter if you're competitive in any sport. It would be the equivalent to improving your 100-meter dash by 0.05 seconds, or gaining 10 to 15 pounds on your bench max if you were already advanced. And hey, I would take that any day of the week, even if it took me a full year, because I love training. But for somebody who does it to just stay healthy or just does it as a small hobby, not taking it too seriously, it's honestly not worth it. And it also goes to show to what extent you might have to go to if you want to make solid progress as an advanced lifter. And that progress isn't something you can visually assess too easily. Imagine if you train for 5 years and the 6th year you might not see yourself progressing, but then you look at it from a wider perspective. Maybe you did gain a few pounds of muscle over the full year, maybe you got 5% stronger, but it's not as visually apparent. Now this is something I've only read about recently, that many people think Jeff Nippard is actually on steroids and lying to his audience about how he got his physique. But I think this video helps disprove that theory, seeing how his progress is very slow and very natural, and no spikes in strength or weight. It just shows how dedicated he is to making very minor improvements as a natural, and the whole thing was properly documented as well. At the end, he caps out at around a 24.8 on the FFMI scale, which is often used to help assess the natural limit of muscle growth, where anything above say 25 is widely considered close to impossible to achieve as a natural if you have a low level of body fat. So Jeff is actually up there amongst the elites in natural bodybuilding, and he's not exactly getting younger either, because he's currently 34 years old, and building muscle nearing your 40s might become an issue. But I'm really excited to see that Jeff is also doing supposedly another big project like this in the near future, and that he keeps producing high-level content like this. But what do you guys think? Was the 2.7 pounds of lean mass in 1 year impressive? Was it expected? And do you think that Jeff has hit his natural ceiling? Let me know what you think down below in the comments, and as always, I'll see you all next time.